Okay, good morning and welcome everybody. We'd like to call this meeting of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council to order. Again, thanks for your time and attention. Thanks to Paul and Jen, as always, for their help in with the audio visual, and Angela Gong for just all the work that she does behind the scenes, putting agendas together and keeping us all rowing in the same direction. So thanks, Angela. Want to acknowledge Lynn DeFreitas and great friends of Great Salt Lake that pulled off a great issues forum this last week. Thank you, Lynn. It's a monumental effort. It goes on every other year, and it's been a great forum for a long time, so thank you for that. We typically, and I know because most of the folks here are repeat offenders, we typically go around and do quick introductions. The purpose of the introductions is mostly so that if you're here for the first time, you know who's wearing what hat, and if you want to do follow-up with them, you can. But we'll do just a quick round of introductions. Start down there with Joe, maybe if you could just introduce yourself. We've got council members and liaisons here at the table, and then we've got the folks in the public as well. We typically don't do the online, even though we have typically a lot of people joining us online, and we welcome them as well. So, Joe?
Joe Havasey, representing Extractive Industry.
Ryan Doherty, representing Tooele County.
John Crofts, representing Davis Board of Commission.
Waylon Myers, Central Davis Sewer District.
Leland, representing any group, you say?
Any group of sewer people.
Okay, any group of sewer people. Tim Hawks, aquaculture. Let's go Brad, maybe to you, Brad.
Brad Perry for the tribes.
Darren Hess, Public Water Suppliers.
Hugh Herlo, Utah Geological Survey.
Angela Gong, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
I'm Jesse Stewart with Salt Lake City.
Jan Streifel, League of Women Voters.
Lynn DeFreitas, Friends of Great Salt Lake.
Jim Harris, Division of Water Quality.
Chandler Rosenberg with Great Salt Lake Rising.
Jason Brown with Envision Utah.
Jeff Denblaker, Jacobs Engineering.
Aspen Johnson, Office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner.
Keith Hambrecht, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Ted Balling, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Ben Stireman with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Emma Whitaker, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Dave Hatch with Stantec.
Andrea Nelson, Congressman Burgess Owens.
Okay, again, thanks everybody, and thanks for all those that are joining us online. I notice Commissioner Lee Perry's on. I'm sure there's some other members, council members, and liaison Warren Peterson and others online. So thanks everybody for being here. I neglected to declare, but we do have a quorum present. So we have the agenda, which you all should have received copies of, along with the meeting invite. Can I get a motion from a council member to approve the meeting agenda? So moved. Leland. Second. John, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 I'll rule that motion carries. The agenda is approved. You also should have received meeting notes from our March 11th meeting. I did get one clarification to those meeting notes, and that's that it said that Warren Peterson was representing Farm Bureau. And while Warren Peterson does represent Farm Bureau, in this capacity, he is the agricultural liaison to the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. So just wanted to note that clarification. With that clarification, could I get a motion to approve the meeting notes? Okay, Leland, thank you. In a second. Okay, thank you very much. We have a second motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? I rule that motion carries and the minutes are approved. Thank you. So on today's agenda, apparently there's a massive traffic jam coming down from Logan. So a couple of people that will be presenting, Hannah Freeze from the Commissioner's Office and Matt Yost from Utah State, are stuck in said traffic jam. So Ben, if you're game, Ben Stireman, I hate to put you on the spot, but we'd love to have you talk about the comprehensive management plan. You're good to go? Okay. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate you being flexible there. Thanks for being here.
Oh, I just need to get rid of this, huh? Okay. All right, perfect. So I'm going to apologize in advance for anybody that was at the issues forum because I updated on our comprehensive management plan as there as well. So you're going to get a bit of a repeat, but hopefully hopefully some new things that I'll say that I didn't say then. So again, my name is Ben Stireman. I'm the Deputy Director at the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. We manage forestry, fire, and state lands for the state of Utah. You probably ask yourself why Forestry, Fire, and State Lands manages Great Salt Lake, but we manage sovereign lands, which are the lands lying below the ordinary high water mark of navigable bodies of water at the date of statehood. These include Bear Lake, Bear River, Great Salt Lake, Jordan River, Utah Lake, and portions of the Green and Colorado rivers. So we have a statutory mandate to update our to prepare comprehensive management plans for each of the navigable waterways in the state of Utah. The Great Salt Lake CMP was last updated in 2013, and a lot has changed since 2013. We have started to manage the berm. We've had historic low lake levels. We've learned a lot about microbialites. We had one of our massive producers, US Magnesium, on the lake, no longer operating. Tons of appropriations and statutes enacted regarding water and how we manage these lands, and really a shift in public attention as well. So how do we go about updating a plan for a resource as important as Great Salt Lake? We start with seeking public input. We review existing information, incorporate changes in the laws, rules, and regulations. We update management classes, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And in this case on Great Salt Lake, we have a really neat tool, the lake level matrix, that we also incorporate new changes and things that we've learned along the way. We work with our multidisciplinary planning team, and then we coordinate with all of our other planning team members with the state, local agencies, cities, counties, anybody who has subject matter expertise. And then we go right back to the start, and we once we get that drafted, we go back for public comment and input. And then that's where we do a little bit more of a formal response to those comments. So we'll actually respond and append those comments to the end. So our goal is to be able to, in the drafting of this document, get it to the best point we can before we put it out to draft and start to receive those comments back. And so hopefully we receive minimal comments at the end because we completely nailed it. So as part of that public input that I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to touch a little bit on how we started that. So we went and did meetings in each of the counties surrounding each of the surrounding Great Salt Lake, and we had open houses. We also had an online open house where folks that couldn't make it to the county meetings were able to attend, and we recorded that so people could come back and watch. We also had surveys on our website. We did interviews one-on-one with stakeholders as well. But we left that open, and these are some of the questions we asked. So one of them was interest in geographic areas, like what part of Great Salt Lake interests you? Is there anything in specific that you think we should really hone in on, or is it the whole lake? Are there things that we're not thinking of? And so this allowed people to put a pin on the map and kind of explain what it is that they thought we should be really focusing in on and where. We also asked what the most important issues are within the Great Salt Lake plan that should be addressed. You can see here, development, lake level management strategies, birds. These were a lot of the issues that were rising to the top there. We also asked what the #1 barrier to effective implementation of the management plan would be. And I was a little bit surprised to see that there's a perception that there's this, this lack of coordination among state agencies, because my perception in 5 years of working for the division is that, especially with Great Salt Lake, this is one of the most well-coordinated resources, in the state, if not the country. There is so much attention to this, and I think this advisory council is kind of testament to that. We have, all different walks of folks that are interested in the lake, all coming together to solve this solution. We've had a tremendous amount of, interest from really just across the spectrum of people. And I think our state agencies do a really good job at sticking with the mandates they have, but coordinating to make sure we're all kind of swimming in the same direction. So anyway, I think that maybe we need to just do a better job telling that story and telling people how we're coordinating. And that's one thing that we're going to try to address in that plan. I was also slightly confused because we also had, some comments where we don't want management policies that are too prescriptive, but we also want management policies that are prescriptive. So we're going to try to find somewhere, in between there to, let people know how we're managing there. I did want to give you a little bit of a overview about what the plans do and what they don't do. So what they do is they give us the principles for managing sovereign lands under the public trust doctrine. They also provide us with management strategies that balance the various interests in Great Salt Lake, ensure that resources are managed under multiple use sustained yield principles, and they clarify allowable uses on sovereign lands. What they don't do is they don't duplicate the work of other agencies. And Lynn, I'm going to be a little more clear on this one because I think I confused the issue at the issues forum, but we don't govern water distribution in the state. So we don't manage upstream water. We don't tell the conservation districts how to send water, how to manage reservoirs or storage operations. We don't regulate, groundwater into the lake. So that's not what the plan does. But we obviously have a great interest in water getting to the lake. Since 2022, we've had the statutory authority to be able to hold water rights for the benefit of Great Salt Lake. And we've actually amassed a pretty great portfolio of water rights thanks to the voluntary agreements with the mineral companies, the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, and the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office. Through this process and within this plan, I talked a little bit about the coordination. This is just a little graphic that I thought was interesting that Jacob's put together for us that kind of details just how complicated it is, right? I mean, we have all these agencies that have plans and, strategies for managing Great Salt Lake. And this just kind of shows how they all come together. So our comprehensive management plan as the executive management authority for Great Salt Lake is really meant to pull that together and help to execute that and make sure that the decisions we're making for Great Salt Lake are complementary and supportive of these, all of these different plans. We also participate heavily in these plans, and then they feed into the strategic plan, or I should say the strategic plan perhaps feeds into this and tells us how we should be, creating our plans. So with this update to our CMP, I like to compare it to like a home remodel. And I think there's like some home remodels where you slap a coat of paint on and you're done. And in this case, I think we're like taking it all the way down to the studs, and we're taking everything that was good out of the plan, and we're going to keep that, try to make that better. And then we're also going to build onto it. I don't think it's going to be, recognizable from the perspective of our previous plans. And so one of the things that we're doing is, and I guess one of the criticisms that, we've received and that I've also acknowledged as well, is that, our old plans act a lot like a NEPA analysis or a really large 400-page book report. So they had tons of great information, but I don't feel the need that we need to continue to redo that. And we're going to keep that plan, and it's something we can go back and acknowledge and find that great information. But we also, the second we publish a plan, they become dated, right? Every day that passes, we're learning new information. And so we don't want something that's going to stay dusty and, get shelved. We want this to be very useful and something that we can continue to update. And then in 10 years, it's not such a heavy lift to go back and redo this. Again, like I said, the Great Salt Lake elevation matrix, one of the things that, that immediately stands out to me is, we don't even really talk about microbialites in that matrix, but we know now like the distribution of the microbialites, and quite a few other issues that we would want to address in there. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what we've done is we've created a dynamic approach. We call it the Great Salt Lake Explorer, the Explorer, where you can go in and we've kind of parsed out the information that will be living. We'll be referencing a lot of other agencies' documents. We'll also be updating information as we learn that. So we do all these tech team grants. If we learn something new in these grants, we're going to update that on our website. So when you go and look at our website, you're going to be able to see the elevation, the salinity, other metrics that matter and will help people understand what's going on the lake. You can also click it on a location and understand, what type of activities we would permit or what would be allowed. It'll be much more dynamic and user-friendly. For those of you that still like to hold a piece of paper, we will have a plan that we can print, and it will be that portion of it will be static, and there are statutory requirements, things that do have to stay static that we will use to update, and we'll do them every 10 years, and we'll go through the same public process, but it'll be a much smaller portion of that document. And I'm hopeful that Jacobs may have even, lost their chance at an update later, because I think this is something we might be able to do in-house, because we now are going to keep this thing updated all the time, and then really focus in on that small portion, which I think this is something our staff can likely do in the future, which will save us a considerable amount of money that we can put right back into Great Salt Lake. So on this modern tool, again, this gives you some visualization on the current vulnerabilities based on lake level and salinity, links lake level conditions with corresponding management strategies, considers and includes strategies for the what ifs, and it's designed for ongoing updates. You all saw that map, I think, a few slides ago that had the color codes. It kind of looks like a zoning map for a city. And these land use classifications, starting at 1, are the least restrictive, all the way to 6, which are the most restrictive or conservative. And they kind of are based on the different values that we have regarding the resource and what needs to be protected versus where we may allow for development. So one example of that, this is a comparison of our old draft classification, or excuse me, our old map, and then our new draft classification. And don't get too hung up on the colors. We've got all kinds of ADA requirements we're trying to adhere to now. And so there's some slight changes in there, and we're still working through those, but I'll explain some of these changes. So in the old map, you'll notice, like, for example, US Magnesium takes over an area that is also outside of their ponds. This is an area they had leased with an option up into the North Arm. That's no longer there, but we know that, right outside of those ponds that exist, we're likely going to have to do some pretty major work. Like we're kind of buckled down now on this US Magnesium issue, and there's going to be some remediation that needs to happen. It's likely going to involve work outside of those ponds. So we've identified that as a Class 2 area that will likely require some work in that vicinity. The areas that are currently encumbered, so like the Compass Ponds, the current US Mag Pond, those areas, they're Class 1 because we know they've been, they're being used for a purpose, an industrial purpose. It's likely they will continue to be, so we've classified them as such. Marinas, that's another great example. If there's a marina there, the intention would be that we would likely permit the marina in the same location. Class 2, again, becoming a little bit more restrictive. There's really only those two Class 2 areas. There's one kind of nestled in between the Causeway and the Compass Ponds, and then the US Mag area. Class 3, again, is kind of more open for consideration of any use, and then it gets more and more restrictive as you go on. You can also see the shape of the map has changed a little bit. There's been some progressions with the bird refuge since we last created this map. We've also refined some of the WMA boundaries. There's been a new WMA as well with the bird refuge, with the Bear River Bay. So we've updated the map accordingly. And then the way that this is, really used is, classifications only really mean, they don't mean a lot without this. So essentially you can come in here and you can look at a classification and you can go to a potential use and you'll know if it's allowable, not allowable, or potentially allowable, and in this specific use. So we've kind of identified all of the things that we think we normally get, of applications for grazing. It could be, solar evaporation ponds. It could be a pipeline. It could be a utility easement, whatever it is that we normally get requests on, boat harbors. I mean, you name it. We've tried to be comprehensive in our approach and identify all those. We know we're not going to get all of them, but we think that characterizing the general, type of work that happens on sovereign lands will give us a good idea. So allowable is pretty obvious. It means that we've done the analysis and that type of activity. The team thinks that there's minimal impacts and it doesn't, avoid any permitting process. It just condenses it. It allows us to permit it within about a 30 to 45 day timeline. If it's potentially allowable, what it means is the state would do our version of like an environmental analysis. We would go through and do what we call a site-specific plan. So we would reach out to like the Division of Wildlife, water quality, others that have specific management authority over Great Salt Lake, and provide them with project details and allow them to let us know if they have any concerns, if they think there's any mitigation that's required, or potentially even if we shouldn't be permitting that at all. And then we move on to our, that more condensed version of the permitting. So that extends the permitting from about that 30 to 45 days to more like 60 to 90 days. And so this new Explorer we have is much more interactive. You can actually zoom into it and you can see where lines change. The other one was a PDF, so it's really hard to kind of distinguish between those areas. We did build some maps that allowed you to zoom in, but this will give you very specific information about the classification you're in and the use that you're after. And then you can also put other layers on there, like municipal boundaries and flood zones and parks ownership and things that might be of interest if you're someone that's trying to get a permit or a lease on sovereign lands. So we rolled this out at the issues forum on Thursday, but this is an opportunity that if you would like to comment on this, we'll consider your comments and try to make those changes. But you can pull this up with this QR code, and we've created this survey. I'm gonna skip ahead real quick and I'll come back to this QR code, but this is what the survey looks like. It allows you to come in and click on this, any of the zones and look at what the potential allowable and not allowable and potentially allowable activities are. And then you can comment for that classification. If you'd rather, you can also just apply comments at the very end overall. Like if you think that we missed a category of, a use, or if you think the classification was wrong and we should reconsider something, we'd love to hear from you. Right now, we've done our very best to take into account the scientific information and, previous uses, things like that, expert knowledge, surrounding that, and apply that. But we would love to hear from you. You all know the lake as well. So if you have any disagreements or think we could do better on that, please let us know and we'll try to take that into account. So if anybody needs to snap that before I move on. Excuse me. All right. So, and if you need this as well, I can give you a link later. So the next one that we're updating is our Great Salt Lake elevation matrix. Lynn, I know this has been, a topic for you that you've really, loved this elevation matrix, and I think it's been a valuable tool. It kind of sizes up, what you might expect on the lake at a certain elevation. We're trying to do a little bit of a better job kind of identifying, how this elevation matrix is used. You all might be aware that we're party to a lawsuit over the public trust doctrine, and the elevation matrix has kind of had a bit of a play into that and what information is in there and characterizing whether or not the lake is, healthy or not healthy. And I think for the, back when the elevation matrix was being prepared, I don't think anybody had thought that it would be weaponized, against the state. But at this point, it made it really hard for us to decide, do we keep the matrix? Do we continue to add to it? Do we update it, or, and continue to feel this? And I think we did slow down a little bit to try to think through that, through the legal implications of how we deal with the matrix. But overall, what we determined is we want to do what's right. We want to continue to feed the information and provide the information that needs to be put out there to be able to manage this resource. And, we think we're doing, everything we can to, manage the Great Salt Lake in a way that will, get it back to an elevation that's, manageable, everything within our power. And so we decided that we're just going to keep moving on with this. We're going to keep updating it. We're going to keep it alive. And the elevation matrix has proved to be a valuable tool. But we did want to make sure that we premise a little bit about how we use the elevation matrix so folks understand, how this tool is used internally. So we don't look at this as a scorecard, and I'll explain that a little bit. It's more about highlighting the vulnerabilities and then also the level of intervention that's required. So one example I might use is the berm. So we know that elevation and salinity have a correlation. Lake is low. Typically, you would see salinity on the south arm start to spike. We saw that in 2022 when there was no management of the berm. However, we were able to take an action and move the berm and mitigate some of those issues. So this is a mitigation strategy that we were able to employ, and it made that change. Same thing with boat harbors. This is the elevation matrix takes into account when you can use boat harbors. Well, we can dredge boat harbors. So, it takes a lot more effort and a lot more money. And I think that's something that the state, the folks that are appropriating money need to be aware of, that, when these issues are happening, it takes that much more money, effort, time, staff, resources to do that. And not all issues can be mitigated, but this gives you an idea of where we stand at a lake level and what you would expect if nobody was doing anything. So our goal again is to help guide us, guide these management decisions, help our managers know when to, request funding, when to anticipate, if we're in a declining lake paradigm, when we should start to think through, asking for those appropriations or taking those actions. So again, we rolled this out on Thursday. This is an opportunity, if you want to scan that QR code, that you can comment on our matrix. And we've added a lot of citations to that matrix so you can see where this information is coming from. But overall, this is an opportunity to weigh in and let us know if you think we missed the mark on any of these, or if there's things that we hadn't evaluated that you think would be, worth evaluating. This is the chance. Again, you'll have a chance to do this when we publish the draft, but this is a good chance for us to understand anything we may have missed and do the work now. I'll avoid this. When I pasted these awesome citations in, I was going to show you how much work we did, and then it turns out that it's so small that it just looks like scribbles. So anyway, all right. So on our website, again, like I said, we've kind of parsed out the how we manage day to day based on conditions portion of the plan, and the story of Lake Bonneville. You're not going to find that in our plan again. That's been told enough times. So we parse that out. The normal, the CMP is going to have the zoning and all the, how you get a permit on sovereign lands. It'll reference into this and how you use this tool. But overall, this Explorer is going to go through all of these different areas: water, land, air, biology, people, economics. And then you can see all these other tabs, and it'll talk a little bit about how the Great Salt Lake is affecting those, or how the communities are affected by the Great Salt Lake. So it kind of starts to tie all of those things together. And then it also starts to talk about like different management strategies that we're employing during these lake levels. So you'll be able to see at this lake level, here's what the state is doing. And we have both, the lake level, but also, is the lake gaining or is it falling? And we know, like, each year, about where we're at in the spring. We're usually coming up. We know when we usually peak and we know when we usually fall. But we're also going to try to consider long-term trends, because there is a little bit of periodicity and cycles to the climate that I think we can kind of count on and hopefully mitigate for. This is the timeline. It's a little bit fluid at this point because we are still tying off some of the drafting and the finalization of the draft, but we hope to be finished by the end of summer. That would be our goal. Jacobs is sitting there telling me like probably October, but anyway, I'm gonna keep on trying here to get it done by the end of summer, and we will have it done this year. But we are excited to get that out, so we have an official draft. This is our website. Again, if you missed any of those QR codes, you can go here and get onto our planning page, where you can see the elevation matrix and that zoning map. And that is all I have. I did also, because there's several people who've contributed in the room, I just want to say thanks to the Forestry, Fire, and State Land staff. They've been amazing. Emma and Angela and Keith and Ted, they've all just contributed a ton, and they have done a lot of work on this. And then also thanks to Jacobs Engineering. They've been a tremendous contractor to help through this plan. And I think I'm a difficult client. We ask a lot of them, and they've just really taken it to heart and done what we've asked there. So with that, I'd love to answer any questions anybody has about the plan.
Thank you, Ben. And I just want to second the kudos that those of you that work with state. We had a lot of great state agencies here, but the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands really punches above its weight class. Great team, great work. And thanks, Jacobs, for all your great work on this as well. Any questions for Ben on the comprehensive management plan? We'll start here at the table with the liaisons or council members, or online. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, go to the audience. Lynn, take it away.
Thanks, Ben. For the Class 3 management decisions, would something like a proposal to put solar panels at a certain place on the lake be considered a Class 3 cogitation?
Wow, what a timely question. Our staff actually met with someone that's looking at a proposal to do something like that right now, and that's a really hard one. But my take on this is I'm not quite sure how we could put solar panels on a navigable waterway and maintain navigation. So given that navigation is like the cornerstone of our public trust responsibilities, I have a hard time thinking that floating solar would pass the muster. And that's one of the things that we have to consider. But I'm going to ask maybe Jacobs or Emma, did we specifically call out solar on this? I don't think we did. And I think we avoided calling out things that we probably wouldn't permit. So if that gives you some inclination into the fact that I think that would be a hard one to sell. There may be scenarios where solar, I've heard folks talk about, dust suppression strategies. And, we don't manage for like today, we manage for ever. And so we like to think about like, is this going to be applicable in 30 years or in 20 years? And so those are things that we would want to consider, but we have a process for that kind of parses out, how that would work. Anything that's not in the plan that we didn't identify or can't be kind of compartmentalized into one of those, my policy is kind of like when in doubt, we go with the more stringent, site planning and go through that whole procedure. So we would get to the same result. It would just be more, procedure for our staff. But thank you for that question. Also, I'll just say on, solar, I have a really hard time thinking about how that would fit on Great Salt Lake and the environment we're in. This is, one of the most, harsh environments I can think of anywhere in Utah. And so I would imagine there's probably other resources where it could be more appropriate. Yeah.
You are right. I am wedded to the Great Salt Lake Elevation Matrix, and I appreciate the fact that you're going to continue to use that. And I think, the irony of how it was kind of used, as an argument against. However, I think in general for public education, it's been really helpful to give a visual understanding of elevation and mineral and navigation, things like that. So it's a really, really great tool.
We agree. And I think that's where we landed as well, Lynn, is that it's been such a valuable tool for folks to be able to understand why, a low lake level would be concerning and why they should care. Because when you start to see that, shorebirds or, this beneficial use is impacted, I think it's a little more powerful. And when you can see that, a lot of beneficial uses become impacted at certain levels, I think it cues people into action. And so we felt like it was valuable to keep as well.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments from the audience? I can't see the online, but I assume I'd see a hand if something pops up.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate you all having me.
Okay, I don't see any. Thanks so much, Ben. Really appreciate you being here.
Of course, my pleasure.
Okay, we're going to jump back on the agenda. We have Hannah has safely arrived, trekked down, and we appreciate you being here, Hannah. She's the Deputy Commissioner, and she's here to give us just an update from the Commissioner's office, which is a standard item on our agenda. So with that, welcome, Hannah. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I apologize for being late. That was atrocious traffic. Took 2 hours to make a 1 hour drive, so I apologize, but thank you for jumping that agenda around. I appreciate it. Today, I'm going to do something just a little bit different on behalf of the Commissioner's office. So like many of you, probably something that has been in your news feed constantly is conversations about this secret aquifer under the lake. I don't know if I should call it a secret aquifer, but this aquifer under the lake that maybe is being proposed as a silver bullet that could, really be utilized to save Great Salt Lake. And so we have had the opportunity with the Commissioner's office to work with our partners at the Utah Geologic Survey to create a diagram and some talking points about this subject in particular that I think is extremely useful when we talk about it. And so I'm going to turn the time over to Hugh Hurlow from UGS to give a brief presentation that I hope you find useful. And then we would like your feedback on this diagram and what we could do to make it more useful, just in general, as we all interact with the public specific to this question and this conversation. So Hugh, I'll pass that over to you.
All right, thank you. And I want to credit my boss, State Geologist Darlene Batadian, for pushing me to do this. We've focused on it just over the last two and a half weeks. So it is, we did everything we could to get it ready for today. But as Hannah aptly said, we're open to input. I'll try to march through this as quickly as I can. So this was intended to be both scientifically not untrue, or at least accurate, and also accessible. right, to a non-groundwater savvy audience. So there's a lot of wording up here for explanation, but we'll just focus on the diagram for now. And first, we should define a couple terms that will become relevant for issues that have been mentioned here. So an aquifer is a geologic material. So it's sand grains, gravel, clay, or rock, right? And it's below the land surface and it contains water. And the ability of an aquifer to transmit or store groundwater is really variable and depends a lot on the material and its history. I'll just say it now. So there's a great contrast between that and a lake, right? So a lake is an open body of just water that has its open surface to the air. So while trying not to be pedantic, that's an important distinction. Okay, and the potentiometric surface of groundwater is it's basically the level the water will rise to in a well that is deeper than something like 30 feet. There's more technical definitions to it. But basically in an area of, if you drill a well into a highly pressurized aquifer, the groundwater will rise to above the level that the well is open to in the aquifer. And along Great Salt margin, that level is above the land surface. All right, so if you look at the diagram on kind of on the right side, the boundary between the range and the benches, that's underlain by coarser grain sediments, principally deposited by Lake Bonneville. And the most spectacular example is the Weber Delta. Think of all those gravel pits, those deep gravel pits right at the mouth of the Weber River. Those are gravels that dumped out into Lake Bonneville after being carried down slope by the Weber River. And then the sediment becomes progressively more finer grained away from that mouth of the canyon toward the delta. So most of the groundwater enters the aquifer that we're focusing on, which is the sedimentary aquifer below the lake, below the Wasatch Front and below the lake. So most of the groundwater enters that sedimentary aquifer along the range front because that's where the greatest permeability is. And then under the force of gravity, it flows downward and laterally toward the Great Salt Lake. So there's a potential difference in the force of gravity on the water where it's higher in elevation versus where it's lower elevation. And that plus the nature of the aquifer drives that to be horizontal flow as well as vertical flow toward the lake. So the lake, as it's a sink or a final resting place of surface water, it is also a final kind of endpoint of groundwater flow. So that's kind of the flow path. So as the groundwater approaches the lake, it's encountering progressively more fine-grained deposits, and so it can't flow through those as easily. And so it kind of returns to wanting to flow upward under that pressure. And so it starts to daylight or become close to the surface right around the belt of wetlands east of the Great Salt Lake. And I think we all know how absolutely essential those wetlands are. And so while we're not really sure how much groundwater discharges to the surface in those wetlands, we're certain that it is very shallow there and underpins the wetlands so that it kind of holds up the surface water that flows into the wetlands. So there's no like reservoir of porous sediment that the surface water would sink into instead. So in that way, the shallow groundwater there upholds the wetlands. And then below Farmington Bay, now, so Kip Solomon, the professor at University of Utah, who's worked forever on groundwater issues around the valley and Great Salt Lake, recently published a short summary. And I'm looking for that. It was lovethelake.org, okay? And he described kind of how our knowledge of groundwater below Farmington Bay has evolved. This is very recent. Basically, nothing was known about it until the U and and UGS and USGS started a collaborative study on it. I do not love the headline because it implies a lake that, is present below Farmington Bay. That is physically not correct. Okay. And I doubt very much Dr. Solomon had an influence on that, on the wording of that headline. But below the bay, what we see is shown by the orange band of a zone of hypersaline groundwater from wherever the water level is relative to the land surface, which fluctuates between, a half a foot to 10 feet. So there's a zone of very saline groundwater down to about 30 feet. And then our new wells have shown that the water becomes non-saline below that, kind of strikingly non-saline, and is under pressure, vertical pressure that drives the potentiometric surface above the land surface. So typical elevations of the water in those monitoring wells is about 17 feet above land surface. And that's determined by pressure because we don't have 17-foot high wells there. All right. So that water below Farmington Bay, below that saline surface, is derived from this same flow system I described. So it originated along the Wasatch Front or in the mountains. And over time, more than 85 years, possibly much longer, has flowed through the sedimentary aquifer and ended up below Farmington Bay. And it's now, we think, discharging very, very slowly toward the surface, but doesn't necessarily daylight to the surface, except in a couple select places because of the evaporation rate on the playa when it's exposed. So it doesn't surface as actual, wet water very much, except these kind of enigmatic round spots, okay? So there's a connection between the groundwater below Farmington Bay via pressure within the aquifer to all the way up to the range front. So the water below the aquifer kind of feels the pressure of the higher gravitational forces below the range front. So we have over time been releasing that pressure via groundwater pumping along the benches. If somehow we were to decide to pump groundwater from below Farmington Bay, that effect would propagate back up east. So the aquifer to the east would feel the pressure decrease below Farmington Bay if that were to occur via pumping in very significant amounts. And I want to show you an example of this connection. You see there's a flowing well shown at the bottom there of the wetland band. So these are wells, again, they've been there as old as 1900, and the level of water in them is above the land surface, and they're flowing to the surface. My knowledge of this comes mostly from work on the Great Salt Lake Shorelands Preserve. So if you could go to the next slide. We'll show an example of groundwater levels around the lake. We've kind of shown here that groundwater flows toward the lake and helps it. So basically these water levels have been, could you do the next slide, Angela? Thank you so much. I appreciate Angela's help so much here. Okay, there. So on the Groundwater Data Hub, we have taken predominantly USGS groundwater level data and applied some statistics, and we color code those different well sites according to their rate of decline over defined time periods. And I want to acknowledge my colleague Emily Ginerain for developing this method. So we apply, these aren't all the wells, but we applied some statistical criteria for those that we would show on this site. So you can see that groundwater decline rates are not alarming in any given well over the past, I think I showed 10 years there. But if you look at the well that's circled in red, the top diagram is the last 10 years, and there we've calculated the rate of decline at 0.6 feet per year, which is not alarming individually on its own compared to a lot of the agricultural areas like in the Great Basin. But if you extrapolate over time, you see what you have on the bottom diagram, which is strictly USGS data, and I drew a couple of my interpretive lines there that show the slope of the pretty consistent declines in groundwater levels over time. And there seems to have been a gentling of that rate, but I didn't calculate any slopes here. There seems to have been a break in the early 1990s, where maybe the rate of decline declined. But that's the long-term effect. And so you can see groundwater levels have changed from 60 feet above land surface to basically a few feet above land surface over that 60-year period that's shown on the graph. So that, in some way, as we've shown, we're pretty sure groundwater flows toward the lake in this area. So that decreases the amount of flow, both in terms of gravitational potential and actual flow of water to the lake over time. Okay, final slide, please. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention something that we'll be able to present in more detail later. This is what we're calling the Great Salt Lake Groundwater Monitoring Network. We developed this initially in that partnership with the U of U and USGS, and now we've added a few more sites. And so these are depths, nested wells, so completed at different depth ranges. They should tell us a lot about the groundwater dynamics, as much onto the playa as we could physically get. And this was done on purpose because there were no data at these points. And it was done with anticipating the delivery of the USGS groundwater flow model. These data are not on that model, but it can be recalibrated using these data. The reason they're not on the model is that the cutoff date for groundwater data they're using is 2020. And these have just starting to come in. They're not even online yet. But my colleague, Aaron Brinkman, who's working on this, hopes to get them all tallied up and by the end of August. Some of the data are published by the article by Ebenezer Adamaco-Mensah. This is a journal article for his master's thesis. So we also have cores from the sediment, so continuous physical record of the sediments that are going to really expanding the value of these wells and this project in a lot of different ways. So I don't know how much time I've taken, but I better stop. Thank you.
Thanks, you appreciate it. Yeah, questions from council or liaisons about the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, Trevor?
So you mentioned that the travel time is somewhere between, well, greater than 85 years. So we're seeing responses that are delayed. I mean, we do have large cyclical droughts as well as cyclical periods of wet. I mean, from the graphic you showed earlier, we're seeing decline during the high runoff years of the 80s. I mean, how does that calculate in, or is that part of why it needs to be studied more to see the relationship between recharge and how that affects the pressure on the aquifer? I mean, like, does that make sense what I'm saying? How is this playing in? Because when you think about wells, you're thinking decades and centuries, not months and years.
Yeah. Yeah, so just for example, in many wells throughout the state, we see a notable increase in groundwater levels during and after the 1980s, and then a gradual tailing off. So that makes sense relative to a climate response. Generally speaking, the response in a deep aquifer, however that's defined, is slower and more muted than, say, a shallower well. Say like wells at 30 feet would show that climate fluctuation very faithfully. So what else are we trying to get at?
I had a similar question, maybe it's following with Trevor's, and Trevor clarify if it's not. But so what I was wondering is, a lot of these wells, if they're a shallower well, then they may well show changes in land use, which is what we're really dramatically seeing. And or the other option is people are just pulling more water out of the aquifers, and that's leading to declines.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that?
Well, that's correct. And so the deeper wells, the wells along the margin, just their response time is slower. So maybe there's a wave of, or maybe it's too muted. Maybe that recharge that happened in the 1980s, late 1980s, has already been captured by groundwater pumping and kind of never felt as much. By the downstream
Trevor, did that
groups.
answer your question? Do you have a follow-up? You good? Okay. Yeah, Leland, go ahead.
Yeah, so you have your confined aquifer, and then on the surface you have the unconfined aquifer.
Yes.
And do we have any idea how much comes up from the confined aquifer to the unconfined? And do we have any idea of how long it's going to take you to figure out if there's a safe yield from the aquifer?
Yeah, I would say on land, I haven't I did a really rough calculation of that for a report we did on the Great Salt Lake Shorelands Reserve, but there's so few points. You can kind of look at the difference in water levels in a deep well versus a shallow well and kind of estimate how much flow is coming upward from the deeper area. I wouldn't personally put a ton of confidence into that. Whether we'd be able to calculate that using the Great Salt Lake groundwater flow model, it just depends on how they've defined that boundary between the confined and unconfined layers. I would have to think that in the same way I mentioned that kind of upwelling groundwater supports the wetlands, it also at least supports water levels in the shallower unconfined aquifer, if not actually discharges to it. So.
We have time for maybe one more question, so go to Heidi.
Thank you. This is Heidi Hoven, representing liaison to Jordan River Watershed. The playas around Great Salt Lake have been described as discharging playas, and is there a risk of them trending toward recharge, water sinking?
It would take, given the hydraulic head there, the upward gradient, it would take quite a while. The trend is toward that though. And then an important point that I forgot to mention is the sediments near the surface are very clay rich and so have very low transmissivity and porosity. And so, that equally maybe holds a lid on discharge to the surface, but it might also inhibit, surface loss of water from the surface downward.
Thank you, Hugh. I think that's the time we have. Appreciate you being here. Hannah, anything else from your? Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, thanks. And thank you, Hugh. Our next agenda item, we have Dr. Matt Yost here from Utah State. He's done a lot of work on agricultural water optimization over the years, and he's here to present on it's a report, I think, right, Matt? Kind of summarize a report that they've just put out. And so it's great to have you here. Thanks for braving the traffic to be here, and we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you. Let me make sure this works first. Okay. Ooh. Well, good morning on this fine summer day. Feels like it turned to summer in one day. Kind of crazy, wild year we're having. Well, it's my pleasure to share with you an update on a 1.5+ year effort associated with the Basin Integrated Plan to look at opportunities for agriculture water use and potential reductions in water use in the Great Salt Lake Basin. I've presented this a few times to advisory councils and at the Spring Runoff Conference, so hopefully some of you are aware of what's happening and have heard some of the updates, but hope to share those today. So there's 4 main objectives of this work that I'll discuss today, and you can read them there. I'll just walk through each of them and share what we found. So the first objective was to quantify how much water is used, consumed in agriculture in the Great Salt Lake Basin. Sounds like a simple task. The reality is it's a challenge, and there is a lot of uncertainty. And I'm going to show you what that uncertainty looks like. So we started this in late 2024. So at the time, the data that was available was spatial data on evapotranspiration through the product OpenET was available from 2019 to 2023. So a 5-year time period. So that's the period that we use to try to quantify agricultural water depletions in the Salt Lake Basin. Here's the basin boundaries that we identified. There's five sub-basins. So we looked at 3 ways to estimate depletion. 2 were from the product I just mentioned, OpenET, a satellite product that uses imagery to estimate ET, evapotranspiration, actual ET. The Division of Water Resources has another product called Grid ET that estimates potential ET. We expected there to be a difference between actual and potential, but wanted to see how they compared. So the potential is that light blue line, and you can see that it's quite a bit different than the other 2. The darker blue lines are 2 of OpenET's models. OpenET has about 7 or 8. These 2 are the most common, EE metric and ensemble, which is a combination of lots of models. So when we looked at those 2 OpenET models, they had good agreement in most of those 5 years. High correlation. However, the largest difference in one of the years was over 150,000 acre feet of depletion across the basin. Okay, I want you to remember that number. We're going to come back to it. So in many years it's close, in some years it can be quite different. For the rest of the presentation and most of the report that we did, we focused on one of the OpenET models, the EE metric model. It's a model that's used in the Colorado River Basin and has become accepted as one of the more accurate or reasonable models to use in most parts of Utah. So that's the model I'll share. So if anything, we're estimating a little bit high potentially for depletions with this model. Okay, so we use that to estimate depletions in all of the sub-basins and then the entire Great Salt Lake Basin for that 5-year period. You can see it ranges from just over a little over 1 million acre feet up to over 1.5 million acre feet across those 5 years. So again, we're looking at almost 500,000 acre feet variation in depletion from year to year. In case you're wondering, that's a lot. That is a large amount of water. So we have variation in time, which we expect. Each year is different. We have a different amount of water available for irrigation. We have different irrigation practices and management that adapts to that. And so we expect variation from year to year. But when you're trying to quantify depletions and how to reduce those depletions, it's important to realize that they will vary incredibly from year to year. Okay, the other thing we wanted to look at is an average. So if you average those across the 5-year period, you get about 1.3 million plus acre feet of water. And then we looked at, in the next objective, what would a 10% reduction in that depletion be, and how might we get there? What are some options to reduce depletion in agriculture by 10%? So if we look across the entire basin, that 10% would be about 132,000 acre feet of water per year. The other thing we wanted to look at is the Utah-only portion of the basin. The reason being that we have more control over what happens in Utah, potentially, than other states in the basin. So if you look at the Utah portion, we are the majority of the water use in the Salt Lake Basin for agriculture. about 830,000 acre feet. So 10% of that would be 83, reduction of 83,000 acre feet per year. Okay, so now we know that approximately how much is depleted each year. We know that there's a lot of variation in time and in approaches to estimate depletion. Given that uncertainty, we tried to also estimate what options could be used to reduce depletion and what might they cost and how much water might they save. So in consultation with several advisory groups, we came up with about 21 options to evaluate. That included 11 irrigation system changes, 7 leasing scenarios, and 3 crop switching scenarios. We were looking at the technical and the economic possibilities of these options. Tried to comment some on the feasibility and the social implications, but we're not able to dive deeply into all of those aspects. Okay, so we're going to focus on Utah's portion, the 83,000 acre feet per year to reach a 10% reduction. First, I want to show you the irrigation system changes. This is already happening in many parts of the basin through the Department of Agriculture's water optimization program. It's an option that is of interest to many farmers. Improving their irrigation system helps them in their operation to be more efficient, more resilient. So we looked at 11 options. The first, see your left, the first 4 are changing away from surface irrigation. And you will see that there is not a lot of reduction in water that can be achieved moving away from surface irrigation. It's difficult to reduce depletion unless you move to subsurface drip irrigation, which comes with lots of challenges and headache and associated issues. The center 4 there are moving from a wheel line irrigation system to either different types of center pivot sprinklers, MISA, LIPA, and LISA, or a subsurface drip irrigation, SDI. And then finally on your right, the last 3 options are changing from an existing center pivot sprinkler system to a more efficient one, a low elevation, LIPA or LISA, or a subsurface drip. Okay, so in general, making these irrigation system changes, we could achieve 1 to 2% reduction in depletion across the entire basin if it was applied to all eligible fields. Unless you look at subsurface drip irrigation, where you can achieve a lot higher depletion reduction, but again, comes with more complication and cost. Second thing I want to just show you quickly is how many acres it requires. So before, this last slide was the potential reduction, and that reduction is possible if you apply it to this number of acres. Now keep in mind that the total acres in the Utah portion of the Great Salt Lake Basin is just shy of 600,000 acres, okay? So if we were to apply these irrigation system changes to achieve those reductions of 1 to 2% with some of those changes, it requires, in some cases, up to 250,000 or a little under half of the acres, the entire acres in the Salt Lake Basin would have to implement that change. So that's a large area, okay? Some of them, though, do not require as much area. If you look at the center piece there, the center part of the graph, changing from wheel lines to center pivot systems with different types of sprinklers requires much less acreage. And this, I will say, is an option that is of high interest to farmers. Most would happily change to a center pivot rather than a wheel line if they have the means to do that. Next, we looked at leasing scenarios. There's 7 scenarios. So on your left, is a full season lease scenario where no irrigation would be allowed the entire season. And that entire water allocation would be leased. And then the other 6 are partial or split season leases, where only a portion of the water would be leased. The farmer could still irrigate for part and still produce crop. So the first 2 scenarios on the left is where irrigation would cease in either June or July, July or August, after June or after July. So you would stop irrigation on July 1st or August 1st, and that water would then be leased to the Salt Lake. The remaining 4 scenarios are where water would be leased in the early part of the season, and then farmers could or then water, let's see, this is always confusing. So they would lease water early in the season, and then they could irrigate later in the season. So we looked at 4 scenarios there with alfalfa and with corn. Again, starting irrigation either in June or July. The theory there was that a lot of times precipitation is adequate early in the season, so a farmer could take a first cutting of alfalfa without irrigating it, lease that water, and then irrigate after. So here are the savings that we estimated could be achieved by these 7 scenarios. With the full season lease, you can get up to 10%. You can also do that with the first or the 2 options where you cease irrigation later in the season. Yes, Trevor? And then the other 4, for several of those, it's harder to achieve reductions when you lease early season water. Trevor?
So 2 questions. The first is, are the number of acres needed for the different scenarios equal? Or does it change to reach these benchmarks you've noted here?
That's a great question.
Oh,
shown here.
Ahead of the game.
In the next slide.
Second question is, so in your late start watering systems, so scenarios 3 and 4,
yes.
So alfalfa is a tricky plant because certain cuttings have different values. Your first cutting you have heavy tonnage, but it's a lower quality. Your middle cuttings, because of the heat, your relative feed value goes down. I mean, what happens when you start to irrigate alfalfa that late in the season? Do you still get the relative feed value that they're looking for? Because a lot of this goes to dairy hay. Mm-hmm. How does that perform in stems and things like that, where you're letting it sit fallow for the first of the season and then you're watering it later? Do you have the thick stems and the quality you get out of a first cutting, or does the heat still take its effect and you get a lower relative feed value?
Yeah, great question. Most of the time when we've studied it and when people have practiced partial or deficit irrigation on alfalfa, we're usually irrigating it early and then shutting water off and letting it go dormant. In those cases, it produces well, and then you get little to no production. We don't have as much experience on the other side. I will say in some years, farmers don't irrigate the first crop of alfalfa, just gets enough natural precipitation. And then if it goes into drought conditions and they stop irrigating, or they start, my impression is that you would still get similar quality in alfalfa. We haven't studied it a lot to know for sure, but once you start irrigating, alfalfa responds well to irrigation. Once it has water, it usually grows well. So that's what I could comment on that. But yes, to your second question, it is a different number of acres to achieve those savings. So if it was a full season lease, it obviously takes less acres. We estimated a little over 50,000 acres would need to be leased for a full season lease. For some of the partial season leases, may take more, up to 150,000 acres or more. The percentages there that I listed is the percent of the total acres in the Utah portion of the basin. So we need to lease about 10 to almost 30% of the acres based on which scenario is implemented. Uh-oh. We do not want to reboot now. Okay. I better hurry or I'm going to get rebooted. Okay, the third option was to look at crop substitution. We selected 3 scenarios here. There could be a lot of scenarios. These scenarios may not be feasible. I just want to acknowledge that. The reason that we looked at them is there was interest in them, particularly with wheat moving from alfalfa. So 2 of the scenarios were moving from alfalfa to a small grain. And we looked at either a spring small grain or a fall small grain. The reason being that we have a lot of elevation change in the Salt Lake Basin. In some areas, winter small grains do not do well. We also considered this as a forage, which is a common, more feasible option for farmers, and as a grain. The interest in grain was peaked, I think, because a new mill was established in the Cache Valley, and there was a lot of interest in whether the demand for wheat grain would increase and whether that would be an option. So some of the reasons why we evaluated these 3, again, there could be lots of other options. So when we looked at changing from alfalfa to spring small grains, the savings were very small to almost nothing. Moving to winter grains in the lower valleys, we did see a lot of potential there. We could get up to 10% reduction, but if you look across to the other figure, that would take about 1/4 of all of the alfalfa acres in the Salt Lake Basin to achieve that 10%. If you move to corn, we saw that about 3% reductions could be achieved, but again, it would take about 40% of the alfalfa acres. So a large percentage. Okay, so those are the 21 options. Again, I just do want to acknowledge that there are more. There are more than 21. There are a lot more options that could and should be considered. We could not evaluate all of those in this effort. We hope to look at more in the future as more data and resources become available, but this is what it looks like to date. Okay, a third objective was to look at on-farm conveyance system improvements. This was of interest because a lot of this is already happening through the water optimization program and through investments that farmers are making on their own. This includes piping, lining, ditches on the farm. This is not off-farm conveyance systems where most of the water is initially moved, so canals and larger systems. We wanted to look at those, but just did not have the data available to do that across the entire basin. So we started with on-farm, and we had to make a lot of assumptions here because we don't have spatial data sets of on-farm ditches in Utah, unfortunately. So we looked at the area that was surface irrigated, and we tried to come up with some estimates of how many miles of ditch there might be. We estimated about 3,700 miles might be eligible to be improved in the basin, and then did some estimates of how much water you might save from lining or improving those ditches. And it's a small amount. We estimated about less than 1% reduction in depletion, but a contribution, and a contribution that's already happening in a lot of places and for other reasons. Okay, next we wanted to look at the economics of these options. So what would it cost to implement these 21 options in the basin to try to reduce depletion? To do this, we looked at 5 scenarios. And then we built a tool that would allow someone to come up with any combination of those 21 that they might be interested in. So first, I want to just show you each of those 21 options, what they cost per acre foot of water saved. And you'll see quickly that there is a large range in the cost. We have some that are costing less than $200 per acre foot to achieve those savings. Some of those are irrigation system changes. So the least expensive change was to take an existing center pivot and put an improved type of sprinkler on it, a lower elevation sprinkler. The next couple we're changing from wheel lines to center pivot systems that are more efficient. And then we have some leasing scenarios. If you look at SDI, you'll see that it falls on the right side of the graph where we start to get up to $1,000 or a few $1,000s per acre foot of water. And there's two that I did not even put on the chart because they're so high. So moving away from surface irrigation is very expensive on a per acre foot of water saved basis because the savings are small and the cost is high. So a challenge there. So we looked at each option individually, and then we started coming up with some scenarios. And here are the 5 that we looked at. So first we said, if we just tried to achieve 10% reduction only with leasing, what would that cost across the entire basin? The next option was only crop substitution. The third was only irrigation system changes. So we looked at a mixture of changes that might achieve 10%. The fourth was a balanced. We took a third of each of those 3 to see what that would cost. And then finally, we looked at the lowest cost option. We tried to put all of them in the pool and just find the least cost scenario. And these were the options in that one that came up as most cost effective. You ready? Here's what we estimate across the basin. Anywhere from $30 up to $75 million per year to achieve a 10% reduction. You'll see there that leasing is one of the least costly options. It also is a year-by-year effort that is not a long-term savings of water that you might achieve with irrigation system changes. And so, fortunately, the balanced approach, where we look at mixtures of these approaches, longer-term investments in irrigation system changes, crop switching, and some leasing, usually resulted in some of the lowest cost options for reaching that 10% reduction. If you're curious, I just looked at those 3 options and said on an acre foot basis, that's about $360 per acre foot of water to achieve those savings per year. Okay, another objective was to look at water optimization projects. Some of these changes that we've talked about are already happening, and there's a lot of effort by the state to understand what impact those are having on depletions. So we worked with the division and the Department of Agriculture to try to understand what projects have been completed and what we know so far. So the challenge with this is that as of 2024, when we were conducting this assessment, there were a lot of projects still in progress, and many were not completed. And completed in time for us to get a full season of water use to compare it to before the change was made, the irrigation system change. So it limited what we could do. But we did our best. We looked at that period and any projects that had been completed in that period. And then we looked at depletion before and after completion to see what we could estimate. So here are the projects that we could estimate. We looked at actual changes, and then we tried to estimate projected changes for some of the other projects. In total, we were able to evaluate about 11,000 acres of land that had some type of change. And on that land, we estimated about 1,400 or 1,500 acre feet reduction in depletion due to those projects. This assessment should be repeated soon, hopefully, because a lot of projects were completed in 24 and 25, and so the database is much, much larger. But at the time, this was the best that we could estimate. Okay, so some takeaways. First, it's important to remember the importance of agriculture to the basin and the challenge that this will be to them when thinking about changes to depletion and reductions in depletion. We estimated that a 10% reduction could be achievable with these options, some of these options that we showed. It's all would be on a voluntary basis and incentive-based, and it would require widespread participation. As you saw, to achieve those reductions, it requires a lot of acres. And so it would require a lot of participation. Again, the combinations of those options resulted in the lowest cost. Looking at some suite of irrigation system changes, leasing, and potentially crop switching might be the most cost-effective way to get to that 10% reduction. Also, just want to remind you that we did develop this tool that we hope to release that would allow anyone to look at different options and hopefully can continue to evaluate more and more options in the future to identify the best way forward. Thank you. Happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Matt. My guess is let's give a round of applause. Great presentation. We're going to have several questions, I'm sure. We only have about 5-ish minutes on all these questions. So let's start with Leland and then we'll go over to Brad.
Just a quick question. When you evaluated the crop substitution, did you look at what that does as an income for the farmer? Does it change his income? Up, down? Didn't evaluate.
Yeah, great question. In everything that we did, we assumed that we would make the farmer whole, that they would not lose money. And so all of the prices per acre foot were based on that.
Thanks,
Great
Brad.
question.
Yeah, thanks for that. On the irrigation upgrades, with the going to wheel line, you did say that you didn't have a lot of information to get, so you estimated there was only about 3%. If you're lining or piping ditches, was that strictly an on-farm estimation?
Yes. Yep.
So from off farm, from the river to the thing, did you look at any of that?
We did not, no.
Yeah. I think that would make a big help to go there. In your 75 million for that upgrade, how did you get to that number?
So the total cost of these options was a combination. So we looked at the cost of the practice and then scaled that across the acreage that would be required to meet that reduction and sum that up to get a total cost.
Did you consider the NRCS on-farm program that could pay 25, 50, or even 90% of the farmers' wheel lines and things like that?
It's a great point. We did not. This is the cost. So it could be some combination of farmer investment, NRCS, state funding, et cetera. But yeah, we didn't go into who would pay for it. We just tried to estimate what it would cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Good questions. Thanks, Brad. Let's go to Ryan Doherty, and then we're going to go online to Warren Peterson. Ryan, go ahead.
Yep. Question on this slide, the irrigation system changes being the largest, and this is showing an annual cost. Is that a one-time cost? Because once you make those changes, don't they stay there?
Great question. It is an annual cost. So we tried to, there was a one-time investment to changing an irrigation system, but then there are maintenance and replacement costs over time. And so we tried to amortize that over the lifespan of the irrigation system to get a cost per year to make those changes.
Okay, Warren. Let's go to Warren.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. First of all, I wasn't in the room to applaud Dr. Yost, so I want to do that verbally. Just to be clear that Dr. Yost has the confidence and trust of Utah's farmers, and there's no one in the world we'd rather have doing this study. So just plug your ears while I get through this discussion. So since you have no ego, I don't want you to start now, but no ego problems, I should say. So I submitted comments to Tim and to Dr. Yost. First of all, there's nothing in my comments that Matt doesn't already know, but there is a concern among farmers when you get into it really addresses the crop substitution question, and farmers get very nervous about that. But I think it's fair to read the report, Dr. Yost, isn't it, to say that really your emphasis is on the voluntary leasing program, and that probably gets us there until we decide to go deeper. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, thanks, Warren, and thank you for your comments. If you look at this slide and the cost, you almost the same price if you only use leasing versus trying to balance it with other approaches. So yeah, it could be an option, Warren, if we wanted to focus solely on leasing. As I mentioned, it is an annual thing, right? People have to be willing to lease every year to achieve those savings. Whereas if you make some of these more permanent changes or semi-permanent changes, then it lasts a lot longer. It's savings year after year after year without annual enrollment of participants in leasing. So, so I don't know if based on what I've seen, I think a more balanced approach is wise, looking at different options. So we don't put all the eggs in the leasing basket, and build some longer term savings and resiliency, I think is really good. But certainly if you want to get water fast and maybe for the lowest cost, leasing usually comes to the top of the list.
Yeah, just following up a bit of a commentary. I don't have as big a panel of farmers to talk to as you do, but the ones that I talk to, it really is very nuanced how they approach questions of drought and so on. This year, a lot of them are just not growing small grains because they don't have a good market for them, and because they always lose money when they do, and frankly, because they're afraid that they can't water the small grains to maturity. They can hit their alfalfa with a one-time watering, and then that may be all the water they have. So they've avoided the crop substitution avenue this year. One farmer who's been in the business over 50 years says this is the first time he's not going to plant anything, and he even owns his own combine. He just says that the dollars just aren't there. So, but I think there is quite a bit of enthusiasm building for leasing, as long as we don't threaten to take their alfalfa away, because that's the catch crop.
Yeah. Yep. And a lot of truth there. And the crop substitution is a challenge, a massive challenge. And there's all kinds of implications there. And so it's, maybe less feasible than some of the other approaches. Definitely.
Matt, I've spent 2 days, I've burned up 2 days saying what you just said in 3 sentences.
So let me just say, and thanks, Warren. Warren has some written reactions that I think are really helpful to sort of round out the knowledge base. And so we can either put it out to the group, or if you have interest, let us know and we can forward that out. So I think that's, if you want to understand this issue, I think this is a great presentation from Matt. Matt and the team put a lot of work into this, and Warren's document also has a really nice perspective, I think, from the perspective of the ag user and the realities they face. So thank you. We're over on time on this one. Tom, I want to go really quickly to you, and if you got a question here in the room, I don't know, Matt, if you can stick around afterwards. Somebody can grab you in person, but Tom, you're not in here in person, so if you got a quick question, we'll take one.
Thank you, Tim. It's a quick question. Maybe it was already covered. You mentioned keeping our
our farmers whole financially? Maybe I missed it, or if you could repeat or state the impact of the food and dairy industry in terms of I like milk and I like to eat, or are we impacting that industry in some way? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Not an easy, quick answer. We did try to look at the impact of these changes on the regional economy, how it would affect the entire economy, not just the agriculture economy, and try to come up with some estimates there. It's hard to do that and really understand how it affects the agriculture economy. But yeah, it would certainly have implications if we reduce alfalfa production significantly. Then we are going to have to either get feed in from other places, import feed here, or reduce cattle numbers. So yeah, definitely implications. It's hard to quantify them.
Okay, and thank you. And maybe just a side note, as a consultant in the Pacific Northwest for a very large agribusiness, we did efficiencies and we're really proud of the water we saved. And they told us that doesn't pale in comparison to their power savings, their fertilizer savings, their runoff control, all these other savings. But again, their goal was a net, well, actually their yields went up with the efficiencies. So it's dynamic and complicated. So thank you very much. Really good.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, John, I saw a little comment from you, but John Uri couldn't catch it. If you have a second, just to, it sounded like a quick clarification question.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure why the balanced implementation would be less per year than any of the three that make up that balanced implementation.
That's a good question. No, without digging back into it and seeing, I don't know if I can answer that quickly. I think it likely has to do with just how much water you can save with each of the options. So when it's all leasing, it's a lower cost. The balanced approach, you have a third of that leasing. You would then pick the irrigation system changes that probably have the most potential at the lowest cost. So I think that's likely why we're getting similar values, is that you're kind of picking the highest potential of each of the categories and putting them together. Whereas if you only do one option, like irrigation system changes, it just requires a lot more acres to get there, and so the cost goes up a lot. So I think that's probably why.
Thank you, Dr. Yost. Thanks for the question, John. Okay, we'll call it there. Thanks again, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
We have just a few cleanup items, just final agenda items. One that and it's really kind of an FYI. One of the things we've really tried to do with the council is to accelerate our funding decisions so that we're not left at the end of the year sort of scrambling to find projects to fund. We want to make sure that those resources go to the highest and best use. And so we're at that time of year when we need to start thinking about the next fiscal year. And so if there are projects or worthy things to fund that occur to you, please be thinking about those. I'm welcome to entertain, if anybody knows offhand any things that automatically come to mind now, happy to entertain those. There was some interest in the working group recently on doing something on the website to make the website more accessible, user-friendly. But if there are other ideas, you have hot topics like right now, I'd entertain those. But otherwise, I'd say just be thinking about it. We're going to start convening the working group and really start thinking about what we want to do. It's $125,000. So it's not a ton of money, but what can we do to stretch those resources and really answer critical questions, fund critical research, all that stuff. So that's timely. Anybody have anything offhand? I'll just throw it open. Burning. Okay. We're going to need to give it some good thought there. So just wanted to flag that for everybody. The other thing is just other topics that you'd like to hear about in future meetings, or any kind of burning, we'll do public comment here in a second, any burning topics that you have. Now, there is this little tiny issue that some of you may or may not have heard about involving a data center. So it has been proposed that the next council meeting, we address that topic. So that's one that's been discussed. Now, between now and then, I have a question for the group I'd like to get your feedback on, and it's this. The Great Salt Lake Advisory Council really operates principally for information exchange, as you've seen if you've been part of a lot of our meetings. Part of our statutory mandate is to advise the governor, the legislature, and the commissioner's office on issues affecting Great Salt Lake. So one of the potential things that we could do as this group is convene a subset of this group, Coalition of the Willing, to really sort of come up with something that listen, Great Salt Lake Advisory Council has never been the kind of organization that comes out and says, you know, we oppose Project Y. We're just not really built that way, given our membership and everything else. What we could do, though, is put something together that says, hey, these are the critical issues. As far as the lake goes, these are the critical issues that need to be evaluated, right? Any thoughts on process, that sort of thing. So this group could do that and could come up with something, and that could be approved by the group either at the next meeting or even prior to the next meeting. So what's the appetite to do that? I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Group, Leland says good idea. Anybody else? Trevor? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Trevor.
So this is obviously in my county, and it's been a firestorm of discussion. So if we're going to invite that into this arena, we need to invite the facts in, not the shitstorm that we've been dealing with up there.
Yeah.
So if you want to bring the facts in, fine, we can discuss it here, but we need to bring the facts in, because what's being discussed in public, people are talking, well, it's 40,000 acre feet. No, it's a 40,000 acre campus. 40,000 acre feet is a ton of water.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of misinformation. And so if this council wants to give any sort of advice concerning the data center, we need to cool the discussion. We need to focus on the facts. And as you said, point out exactly what's happening. Because right now it's a powder keg that's exploded. And I don't really appreciate the way that it's been handled by the local media, because a lot of it's just not based on facts. So, I mean, let's evaluate it on the facts if you want to invite him in.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. No, we had Commissioner Perry on. He's been right at the center of that firestorm. I think he's had to jump off, but there's a lot going on. Warren, you had a comment?
Yeah, please. I just wanted to support what you said. This group has the mandate to be advisory to the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office, and I just wanted to support your idea of maybe putting that on the next agenda, and in the meantime have a conversation with the Commissioner's Office to see how we might fulfill that role. And then I think you said a committee of the willing to explore how to fulfill that statutory mandate.
Yeah. So let me just, it sounds like, it looks like, just look at the show of hands, there's some interest in doing that. So well, I guess I could just ask you, can I get basically a show of hand liaisons and council members that would like to do that? Angela, that's putting you a little bit of hot spot, but we could also have people. So if you're interested in doing that, can you just being part of that conversation, you raise your hand? Yeah. Okay, Warren's on there too. I see Warren. Okay. Did you get him? Angela, you get enough? Okay. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for your willingness there. And obviously, to Trevor's point, there's a need to be really thoughtful, careful, fact-driven. A lot of speculation, a lot of hype. And in the absence of good information, it's easy to go both ways. We see that with that issue. So thanks for that. Other topics that you'd like to see addressed, Brad? Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
So a lot of things have been going out. We've had a lot of people calling SHPO and calling commissioners on the behalf of the tribe. We never ask people to do that. We don't encourage people to do that. The tribe's stance as it is right now is really Trevor's. Is right now the tribe is yet to meet with local, state, city, county, federal leadership of this project to get the facts. And so the same thing. And so if any of our members outside of the tribal council, there's 7 of us, unless you hear it from me or the chairman, it's not true. And it shouldn't be given any sort of weight. And if you would please pass that on. I know Darren Perry did a video that, probably didn't help Traverse County at all. And we did not, First Amendment rights, everything people can do. And so we can't cease and assist anybody. We can't do that. But the tribal council will if it, to this board has designated me as the spokesman to the media and to everybody. So whatever I bring, forth here will have already been discussed by tribal council, and you'll hear the straight stuff from me about council and how they feel. And right now we've yet to meet and get all the facts. So that's where we end. And just like to get that out there, because I know there's been a lot of phone calls on our behalf, and please tell your people, just don't do that. We're actually able to advocate for ourselves.
Thanks.
We're very good at it. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate that clarification. Okay.
Well, and Chairman, one point I'd like to make is my comment should not be construed as a support or, taking one side of the issue or the other. It's that the way it's happened has caused a lot of contention and unnecessary, who knows what the facts are.
Yes.
And that was the point I'm trying to make. I'm not saying that myself or the canal company are for or against the data center. It's that, we need to have a facts-based discussion.
Thanks for that clarification, Trevor. No, we appreciate that. And I think, if there's anything in some of the lessons learned out of this, it'll probably have to do with process more than substance. But I do think as far as the lake goes and impacts go and everything else, there's some good discussion to be had there. So thanks everybody for your willingness to engage on that. I do want to open it briefly for public comment without devolving into a data center, great data center debate. But it is tradition to open it for public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and open it for public comment. Anything from the public? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public comment. That concludes our agenda for today, unless anything burning from anybody here around the table. A reminder, our next meeting is, Angela, help me.
July 8th.
July 8th. Okay, and that's here? Yes. And that'll be here on July 8th. So thanks in advance for your participation there. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Ryan, that's first and a second. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. I'll rule that we are adjourned. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all the presenters and the time you put into putting that together.